Right, so a often forgotten part of World War One is when Britain entered into the war, all of its empire entered into the war as well. That included India. And there were Indian soldiers that fought in World War One on behalf of the British government, fought in Europe, for instance, fought in other parts of Asia. And many Indians hoped that in exchange, if not given independence, would be given self-rule, something similar to what existed in Canada. Technically, Canada was part of the British Empire, but it basically ran itself, or Australia, something similar to that. And that just did not happen. The British sense of superiority that we've talked about in other chapters continued to exist, and the frustration the Indians felt continued to grow. And the situation was, largely ignored by the rest of the world until this man, Mahatma Gandhi. Originally he was called Mohandas Gandhi. That's his given name. Mahatma is a title, means great soul. Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi begins to desire for his native India independence, an end to the untouchables, the outcast, and wanted to try to bring together the Muslim and Hindu populations in unity in India. Now, that was not always his goal. At first, as a young man, he was a lawyer and even left India and traveled to British South Africa to practice law. There was quite a large Indian immigrant population there. And that's when he really experienced firsthand racism that drove parts of the British Empire. While in South Africa, one day he bought a train ticket first class and he took his seat. He bought the ticket. A white man got on board, wanted his seat. He refused to give it because he bought the ticket, and the officials on the train took Gandhi and literally threw him off the train. Not while it was moving, of course, but they bodily threw him off. And this was a wake-up call to Gandhi. And he realized violence was not going to work. And so instead, what he began to do in South Africa was practice civil disobedience. That is non-violently resisting and outright breaking laws considered to be unjust and unfair and inhumane. Not just laws you don't like or inconvenient, but are literally an evil, unjust law, something that violates morals or violates human dignity. So he begins to encourage others, let's not follow these laws. And when we get in trouble for these laws and we get arrested for these laws, let's not react violently, let's react peacefully, and that will bring more attention to our cause, and also reflect how evil the system is that is arresting us. This takes great self-control and bravery. And he begins to have success in South Africa. So he goes back to India and he brings his ideas back with him of civil disobedience, and even blends it with aspects of Hinduism that promoted peaceful nonviolent existence. So, for instance, one of the things he suggested was that the Indian people stop buying British-made cloth. He said, why would we fund our oppressors? Instead, let's weave our own cloth. So Gandhi, on a daily basis for decades, would spin his own thread, and he encouraged others, don't buy British cloth. We can make our own cloth. Let's hit them where that hurts in their wallets, right? Peacefully. This doesn't require violence, but it can gain attention. Probably his most famous act of civil disobedience was when he protested the salt tax. Basically, Indians could not harvest their own salt, which they had to have to preserve the food and for nutrition. They had to buy it from British merchants. These British merchants would make it very expensive. And so here you have these British merchants that had a product that Indians had to have. It was not a luxury. They had to have that salt, and they were increasing the price. And Gandhi's like, that's not fair. You are putting greed over the needs of the people. So that's an unjust law. That is unfair. So he announced that he was going to march from the center of India to the coast of India, to the salt flats of India, and he was going to harvest salt. He announced it. He said, I'm going to do it. Let's see what happens." And he begins his march. And as he marched over the months, more and more people joined. It became a huge story until he goes to those salt flats. He bends down. He picks up a handful of salt, thus violating the law. And it put Britain in a complicated position. Technically, Gandhi broke the law, but if Britain arrested him for breaking this law, they will look like jerks in front of the entire planet, which is exactly the point. Gandhi said the point of civil disobedience is not just to win, it's to turn your enemy into your brother. One of the aspects of civil disobedience that is often overlooked is it makes your enemy think about what they're doing. It forces them to look at the unjust nature of the law, and it can begin to change minds. Now, this is very important in U.S. history because his acts of civil disobedience influenced the civil rights movement and Dr. Martin Luther King. In fact, Dr. King went to India to study civil disobedience and brought those methods back. And you begin to see it. The lunch counter sit-ins, African Americans simply sitting down, ordering a cup of coffee, violating the laws of segregation, marching in the streets for the right to vote. And when police would act violently, they would not respond in kind. The Freedom Riders, who protested the segregation of the buses in the South. And in this picture here, you see two of the Freedom Riders that when they got off the bus were attacked by local members of the Ku Klux Klan. And Dr. King and others, the civil rights movement, said, do not respond violently. Eventually, we will begin to change hearts and we'll begin to change minds. And it works. It succeeded. So Gandhi brings such attention to the cause and becomes world famous. But there's also politics involved. Remember the INC, the Indian National Congress. Remember their first goal was to share in the governing process. At this point, they're just demanding outright independence because Britain would not cooperate. So if Gandhi is like the heart of the Indian independence movement, this gentleman on the screen here, Jawaharlal Nehru, he was the political force behind it, the negotiator, if you will, leading India towards independence. So you have this very public, almost spiritual aspect of civil disobedience led by Gandhi, and this very political, practical side led by Nehru. There is problems in India, though, because of religion. Not everyone in India was Hindu. There was a Muslim minority, and they had formed their own group called the Muslim League. And at this point, the Muslim League is led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and he begins to advocate for the Muslims to basically break off from India and have their own country called Pakistan, land of the pure. This will have dire consequences in the future. Eventually, India will gain its independence, but part of that independence process is Pakistan breaks away. You fast forward today, Pakistan and India, they still are not on good terms with each other.